Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast, Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as well. Joining me on the West Her Hotline as we gear up. Joe, we're 1 day away, and, I heard you mention the hay is in the barn. At this point, we're just kind of waiting for things to get started tomorrow.
You know it, the hay is in the barn.
Yeah. Well, how are you feeling right now? Let me mention this to you. So NFL Next Gen Stats, they've got it where the prediction of the Bills' first pick in the draft, and the way they have it is defensive line is twice as likely as any other position. Now, that groups together defensive end and defensive tackle, so that might be a little bit of a cheat. If you split that, it goes edge, tackle, and corner all pretty much have a 20% chance of being taken with the first pick. It's a defense-heavy draft for this group, and I think we're still very much expecting them to go that direction.
Yeah, that's my expectation as well. The Bills certainly have some needs they could get ahead of offensively, whether that's interior offensive line or filling out some depth at receiver or tight end. But certainly feels like the needs are on the defensive side of the football. That was the unit that kind of cost this team their opportunity to maximize on Josh Allen's MVP season. And so that's my expectations, but if I've learned anything about the draft, it's to expect the unexpected.
Okay, let's go to one of those unexpected scenarios. You mentioned interior offensive line. What is the line of thinking to get the Bills there? If there's someone that falls and they just love so much, when and how could it happen that an offensive lineman on the inside is taken for them?
Well, it's about getting ahead of needs. Connor McGovern, David Edwards, both expiring contracts, starters, and then, of course, Osiris Torrance is extension eligible after the season, and you feel like that's going to be very expensive. You already have two very expensive offensive tackles. I think Brandon Beane has learned a lot about the offensive line during his tenure with the team, where I thought that was a big black eye for him, especially the guard positions early in his tenure, and of course what was around Josh Allen in it was rookie season, right? Just kind of not good enough. And I think he's prioritized it and learned a lot along the way. And I could see him wanting to get ahead of those potential needs. As far as like players that I could see the Bills liking, I think it's a good offensive line class. Jonah Savianaya out of Arizona is a player that I think the Bills will like his size and versatility and power and his body control. I think body control is a big thing that the Bills care about. So if you're into the weeds and scouting offensive linemen, focus on that. Guys that can be rooted in the ground and sit on their hips and, really stay in control of their frame. That's an important part of what they're asking for. But it's hard because we spend so much time corners, D tackle, D end. It's thinking into your offensive line at the end of the first round. While I think there's worthy prospects, I haven't really committed much time to thinking about which one the Bills could potentially surprise us all and pick.
Yeah. How about some of the players to stay away from? I know it's something you've gotten to a little bit on your show. Corner, defensive tackle, defensive end. There's going to be a couple different spots here. And beyond those positions, ones that you're just kind of holding your breath if they're on the board and it says top available that you're hoping the Bills stay away from.
There's a lot of corners, D tackles, and D ends that I would be completely satisfied with at pick 30. I think they'd have to really, really go deep into the bag for me to not understand it. A guy like Deion Walker out of Kentucky, I don't think the world should be thinking about him as a top 30 pick.
So,
go ahead.
On him, because I did a mock draft the other day, and I'm into maybe the third pick the Bills have, the second rounder, and I'm looking at defensive linemen, and I did the thing where I just clicked, and I looked at their weight, Joe. Right, I looked at the size because I hadn't gotten the big guy yet, and he's one of those big guys. But you're not a fan.
No, I mean he's 6'7", 340 pounds, and I'd guess there's not much of that from the waist down. He's just really underdeveloped in his lower body, and that's where you generate mass. And at 6'7", if you can't be able to leverage your hips and you're top heavy, that's going to be tough for you in the NFL to have enough contact balance. And it shows up on tape. I mean, this guy gets driven all over the football field trying to defend the run and anchor, and he just has just a very soft anchor, and he doesn't even move well. He's a big dude that I think has clunky movement skills. He's got some straight line bursts at times, but not the type of movement skills you'd think of as a premium prospect. So the Bills had him in for a visit, so that's why I have a piece of panic about me with this player, but. I've been on him for 2 years, waiting for to see some of the hype, and I've been very, very underwhelmed.
Other players in this draft you're not a fan of that could be the end of the first round, that could be in the mix there? You mentioned you like a lot of the corners, a lot of the edge, a lot of the tackles, just name here or there. Are there receiver options you'd be wary of that could be in the first or second round, like Matthew Golden? I know you're a fan of his game, but we don't expect him to be there. What first and second round receivers would you be a little bit wary of?
I think Luther Burden's the name that comes to mind for me out of Missouri. I think he's very, very dynamic with the ball in his hands. Yards after catch ability is very, very nice, but I think the route running profile is just very underdeveloped, and I think you got to have more. And the Matt Miller tweet this week where teams have asked for practice film of Luther Burden running routes, and then Matt Miller posts this 2 or 3 minute clip of him running routes, and I'm like, this isn't even impressive. Like, this is what you came up with. This was the reel that you thought the world needed to see to validate that you're not just a get in space and throw him the ball and ask him to create player. I was pretty surprised by that. Certainly development can happen, right? I don't want to, really just cap the guy. I think that's unfair, but I'd want more of a proven route running profile if I were going to pick Luther Burden early in the draft. And maybe another name is Nick Emanwari, the safety out of South Carolina. Brandon Beane was at the South Carolina Pro Day, and so I think there's some natural dot connecting there. And there's people that think the Bills need a safety. I'm not one of those people, but I acknowledge that there's people out there that believe that, and you're seeing mock drafts. I mean, Peter Schrager's mock draft this morning that he just dropped, Malachi Starks out of Georgia as Bills pick at number 30. I like that a lot more than Nick Emanwari. In fact, I really like Malachi Starks. I don't love the position, but you could certainly sell me that he's the best player on the board at pick 30, and I can live with that. But Emanwari, I think, is really physically gifted, size and athleticism for days, all of it you could ever want. But he's a guy that projects more as a low safety that doesn't really thrive in those deeper alignments. And I think the Bills kind of have the high tools, low safety in Cole Bishop. And Nick Emanwari is the guy that I think is underdeveloped with his processing skills. And I think there's just limitations in what he can do in deeper alignments. And so as a projecty safety that's redundant to what they just picked in the second round, that would be one that I'd have a hard time understanding.
Joe Marino, Locked on Bills podcast. Bean yesterday said they don't have 30 first-round grades, and that obviously leads to speculation that they move up or down, right? Like, hey, you are picking at the end of the first round. It's not likely that any team has 30 first-round grades. We kind of go through this every year. So, if there's need and the price is right and a team is eager, Bean could move up. And this NFL Next Gen Stats actually puts the Bills as more likely to move up than down. And we won't know that until the draft is actually playing out. But do you have a feel for that? If you feel like they are more likely to go up than down?
Well, you could talk me into either scenario. Bean does have his reputation for trading up, in particular in the first round, but his behavior lately has been way more trending towards trading back. In fact, his last 7 draft day trades have been move backs or move out of a pick. And so that's pretty fascinating. The thing about the quantity of first-round picks, no team's ever going to have 30 first-round picks. I think most of them are probably around 15, maybe a little under, maybe a little over. But it doesn't necessarily mean that every team has the same 15 players as first-round grades. And it's just about how they fall off the board. I mean, the Bills could be in a position where it's pick 24, 25, and they got 2 or 3 of their first-round grades left, because it's not a fact that all 15 of them are going to be the first 15 picks or in the first 20, right? So there's that possibility. And I think in a world where the Bills have first-round grades available and Bean can part with pick 109, his classic move, trade a fourth-round pick to move up slightly in the first round. He's done it 3 or 4 other times. That's kind of what I think Bean could do. I don't know that they'll go way up, but if they can part with a 4 and get a few picks ahead to secure one of their last first-round grades, I can see that happening. And then the other side of it is, okay, you're cleaned out, and somebody wants pick 30, take it, depending on how far you move back. And there's probably a group of players you'd like to pick, and if you feel like you can move back and get one of those guys and maybe recoup a 3 and give yourself more ammunition to move up on day 2, I think that's kind of the other side of the trade conversation.
And it might come down to ability to jump in right away, plug and play. Like,
sure.
He talked yesterday about forecasting some players for immediate starter versus this guy could develop into something. And I might be putting you on the spot here, but do you have a couple of names like an all-ceiling team where you feel like, sure, the guy might be drafted 30th, but the ceiling 5 years from now, we're talking about him in a different light? Because it does feel like this draft, every team wants to, of course, hit home runs. But the way the Bills are constructed and the way we want them to find their way to A-plus players, because they've got a lot of B-plus players, an awful lot. They're a very deep team, a very good roster. Who fits that description at one of the positions we might be talking about, an all-ceiling team?
Yeah, the guy that instantly came to mind for me there was cornerback Darian Porter out of Iowa State, who only started 7 or 8 games at Iowa State this past season, like in 6 years at Iowa State. But just talking about high tools, I mean, all the size, length, athleticism, speed you could ever ask for. And Iowa State plays a lot of zone, and that's helpful because I think when you watch this player on tape, you know, you got to have instincts to play in zone. And I thought he held his own in his opportunities to play defense. And, you know, he's got such a big wingspan, and it shows up at the catch point, and it shows up when he tackles and makes impact plays on special teams. But, you know, certainly probably a little under-repped, and he can get repped and maximize on the physical upside. You know, you could be looking at a Reek Woolen type player, fell very far in the draft, and Seattle seems to have gotten a really good player. And I remember one time I mocked Reek Woolen to the Bills in the first round, and I got laughed out of town. But in hindsight, that one looks like that would have kind of worked out. So I guess Darian Porter is the guy that comes to mind through this lens.
Deeper into the draft, what positions will be looking for? I mean, we've got, you know, first round's got a lot of mock drafts and a lot of names we know. Second round, we could see, you know, defensive tackle, defensive edge, corner, receiver. But once we get to day 3, Joe, this is the last time we will talk until the whole draft is in the books here on WGR. So what are you looking for late for them to build out depth where they might need it?
Yeah, I've got some boxes I think Bean needs to check on day 3. Let's live in a world where we assume it's some combination of D tackle, D end, corner with those first 3 picks. I think the day 3 checklist includes a speed receiver, somebody that can give them some field stretching ability, but also something else, right? You can't just be a fast guy. You got to be able to play on special teams, whether that's returner or have the profile to be a gunner or a jammer, right? That's important. So they need depth at tight end. Right now, Zach Davidson's uncompeted with to be the tight end 3. He's entering year 5, hasn't proven anything in the NFL. So you need bodies there, and I think you need to draft a tight end that you think can be rostered on game day and actually dress and be a player that can help on teams. I think they should be double dipping at defensive tackle. That's the position for me where it's just so thin and you need cost control and youth and upside. I would be thinking about that. I think they need depth at linebacker. You'd love to get somebody that can bump Balin Spector off this roster and give you some, you know, if Dorian Williams is going to replace Matt Milano in 2026, then you need somebody that can be Dorian Williams. So that type of player. I'd like them to draft a punter as well. They have 2 punters, and both were released by the respective teams that drafted them. You know, you use a pick on a punter. There's some intent there. And neither one was able to finish 2024 with the teams that drafted them, and neither one got another opportunity to punt last year, which is pretty unusual. So, you know, go ahead. If there's a punter you like, go ahead and get one of those. And then I tell Aaron Cromer to pick an offensive lineman that has developmental upside on the interior and go with whatever guy he says.
Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast. You know, as you're mentioning Balin Spector, my next thing was going to get to, like, which Bills players should be nervous this weekend, right? Because we probably don't do enough with how tenuous a lot of guys in the NFL, their jobs are hanging in the balance. They're waiting to see who's going to get picked on all these teams. You know, we kind of joke about James Cook. If the Bills were to draft a running back, that would be sending a message. Cook's an established guy in the league. He's safe. But your Balin Spectors and your all down the Bills lineup, there are guys that right now, you know, when they see the draft, the final tally of who gets taken, it's going to be, all right, time to go. You're in a battle here.
Yeah, I think Balin Spector is a good call-out. I think the Bills like Balin Spector. Certainly they've given him a lot of opportunity despite being injured all the time. But, you know, going into the last year of his deal, with the need to kind of beef up that position from a depth perspective, and the thing with Balin Spector is what other opportunities are going to be there for him if it's not in Buffalo? You know, I would be nervous. I think he should be nervous, and you know, that's the reality of of this league. I think Zach Davidson is another one where right now he's probably thinking, man, I got a real chance to be this tight end 3. If the Bills invest a 4th or a 5th round pick on a tight end, they're not going to roster 4 tight ends. So, I think that's another player that comes to mind where there could be some nerves. I mean, you could certainly get deeper into it. Dane Jackson, if the Bills, I think Jamarcus Ingram's going to be safe. I think it was their best special teams player last year. Of course, Tre'Davious White's in the building. You have Christian Benford. If the Bills double dip at corner, Dane Jackson's probably thinking, man, I don't know if this is going to work out for me.
Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast, joining us as we chat every Wednesday. He's on Locked On Bills. You can subscribe to that. He's on Locked On NFL Scouting. And we've also started a new show we're doing live on YouTube on Mondays and Thursdays as part of your Locked On podcast. So we'll chat tomorrow live.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I thought I was going to walk into some James Cook conversation, so I dodged that bullet, but maybe not tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll get to it. Thanks, Joe.
All right, thanks, Jeremy.
All right, Joe Marino, he of Locked On Bills. It's me, it's Joe, it's Jerry O on Mondays and Thursdays live on YouTube on the Locked On Bills channel. We're doing kind of roundtable shows, and tomorrow will be a draft preview show. So if you want to check that out, you can check it out on YouTube and at the Locked On Bills podcast page as well.